the 8-handled sword, divergent sila, divine general, Mahoraga, one of the most powerful entities in all of JJK. Hell, I'd even say they're even top 5. All this is thanks to their unique ability to adapt to any and all phenomena. Mahoraga is a Shikigami summoned through a 10 Shadows technique, and unlike most Shikigami, it is not meant to be controlled easily. Historically, no 10 Shadows user has ever successfully tamed it. Above Mahoraga's head lies an 8-handled wheel, and this wheel represents the core of how his power functions. When Mahoraga is exposed to a phenomena, whether that is a curse technique, physical damage, energy, visual manipulation, or something more abstract, the wheel begins to rotate. Each rotation signifies Mahoraga analyzing, processing, and gradually adjusting itself to counter that phenomena. Once that adaptation is complete, the same type of attack will no longer be effective. In the same way, the key detail is that his adaptation is not instantaneous. Simple or straightforward attacks can be adapted quickly, but more complex techniques require multiple rotations of the wheel. This is why Mahoraga did not immediately bypass abilities like Gojo's limitless technique. It needed repeated exposure before it could fully understand and counter the effect. This delay is the only real window in which opponents have to defeat it. If Mahoraga survives long enough, the fight increasingly tilts in its favor. Because of this, most characters who fight Mahoraga lose not because they're weaker in power, but because their abilities eventually stop working. Any discussion of bypassing Mahoraga's adaptation, therefore, has to focus on attacks that do not function like normal phenomena, do not allow repeated exposure, or do not give Mahoraga anything meaningful to adapt to in the first place. The first clear example of this kind of bypass comes from Misogi Kumagawa from Manga Box. Kumagawa's ability, All Fiction, allows him to erase any phenomena, event, or even abstract concept by turning them into fiction. When something is affected by All Fiction, it is treated as though it never existed or never happened in the first place. This is important because Mahoraga's adaptation requires an existing phenomena to respond to. If Kumagawa applies All Fiction to Mahoraga's adaptation, the ability itself can be erased before it even finishes activating. Alternatively, Mahoraga's existence as a summoned being could be erased entirely. Kumagawa could erase the concept of cursed energy outright, causing Mahoraga to cease to exist. Mahoraga cannot adapt to something that removes the very conditions required for adaptation. Shikiryoki from Kara no Kyokai or Shikitono present a different type of bypass. Their mystic eyes of death perception allowed them to see lines and points of death on all things, including objects, living things, and concepts. Cutting along these lines causes the target to reach its end, regardless of durability or regenerative ability. Mahoraga's adaptation does not prevent death itself, it only allows resistance to specific phenomena. If Shiki were to strike Mahoraga's death line directly, the results will be immediate termination rather than damage that can be analyzed. There is an important caveat here though. If Shiki attacks Mahoraga indirectly by severing a limb or inflicting partial damage, Mahoraga could potentially adapt. Furthermore, because the mystic eyes can perceive the death of concepts, it is theoretically possible for Shiki to target the concept of Mahoraga's adaptation if such a line exists. In that scenario, the adaptation mechanism itself will be destroyed. Killer Queen from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure bypasses Mahoraga in a much more mechanical way. Killer Queen can turn anything into a bomb, and Mahoraga itself is converted into a bomb and detonated. The result is total destruction of the target. No opportunity for the wheel to complete its analysis. Every inch of Mahoraga's body will be turned into a bomb and erased. Saber's Excalibur from the Fate series operates on a similar principle. Excalibur releases a concentrated beam of magic energy capable of erasing targets at a fundamental level. In the series, it has destroyed high-tier servants and entities tied to wish-granting systems that exist on a conceptual scale. Against Mahoraga, Excalibur's output would cause immediate elimination. Flandre Scarlet from Toho Project has an ability often described as the destruction of absolutely anything. In lore, she can target what she calls an eye, and she can crush it to annihilate that thing it belongs to. Everything has an eye, and she can move it to her hand and then crush it to destroy the target. Her power triggers instant destruction at a fundamental level of whatever she chooses to target. It has been shown to work on massive physical objects such as meteors, which she can destroy without physically touching them. The way in which Mahoraga would survive this is pretty obvious. Once she crushes Mahoraga's eye, he'll simply just die and cease to exist. Gilgamesh from Fate is the clearest example. Through the gates of Babylon, Gilgamesh has access to an enormous collection of weapons, each with their own properties, effects, and conceptual background. Mahoraga adapts to one phenomena at a time. Gilgamesh does not rely on one technique. Each weapon fired introduces a new variable. If Mahoraga begins adapting to one attack, Gilgamesh can immediately switch to something else entirely. The result is that Mahoraga never reaches a stable point where adaptation provides constant protection. Ajimu Najimi from Adaka Box represents the extreme end of this idea. With 12 quadrillion abilities, each functioning differently, Mahoraga's adaptation becomes impractical. Even assuming Mahoraga could theoretically adapt to any single ability, the rate in which Ajimu introduces new ones far exceed the speed which adaptation can compete. Mahoraga's strength lies in long-term evolution, but Ajimu denies that opportunity. Kamijo Toma's Imagine Breaker is not a conventional negation ability that competes with other powers on equal footing. It functions as an absolute cancellation of anything classified as supernatural, regardless of complexity, scale, or origin. This includes magic, esper abilities, divine blessings, curses, and beings whose existence is primarily sustained by such forces. Mahoraga's adaptation relies entirely on cursed energy. Its body is regeneration, the summoning ritual that brings it into existence, the adaptive wheel itself are all supernatural constructs. If Toma makes physical contact with Mahoraga using Imagine Breaker, several outcomes are possible, all of which are unfavorable for Mahoraga. The most straightforward outcome is that the cursed energy forming Mahoraga's body is nullified at the point of contact, causing the Shikigami to destabilize or collapse. Mahoraga is not a naturally existing organism. It does not have a baseline physical form independent of cursed energy, so removing that foundation undermines its existence. An even more likely interaction is that Imagine Breaker interferes with the summoning conditions themselves. Mahoraga is bound to an exorcism ritual tied to the 10 Shadows technique. Imagine Breaker has demonstrated the ability to cancel ongoing supernatural contracts. This bypasses adaptation entirely, is not subjected to a phenomena it can study. It is also important to mention that Imagine Breaker does not escalate in the way Mahoraga can respond to. There's no progression for the wheel to analyze. No matter how many times Mahoraga attempts to adapt, the effects remain the same. Supernatural influence is erased on contact. Adaptation will require Mahoraga to become something non-supernatural, which contradicts its nature as a cursed Shikigami. As a result, Mahoraga cannot meaningfully evolve against Imagine Breaker without ceasing to exist as an entity it is. And then there's the Sword Saint, Reinhardt Van Hestrea, whose abilities function like their own form of adaptation. At the start of the fight, Mahoraga will likely survive Reinhardt's basic physical attacks and begin adapting to his strength, speed, and cutting power. The wheel will rotate as Mahoraga adjusts to the level of force Reinhardt is using. On the other side, Mahoraga, trying to act offensively, runs into their own problems. Reinhardt's divine protections interfere with Mahoraga landing meaningful hits at all. Attacks may miss, fail to land cleanly, or be reduced by resistances granted by the world in response to danger. Because these divine protections can change depending on the threat, Mahoraga doesn't get a stable pattern to fully adapt to. Every time Mahoraga starts making progress, Reinhardt gains protections that reduce that progress. This means Mahoraga can adapt to Reinhardt's offense to a degree, but Reinhardt also adapts back through new blessings. The difference is the speed and ceiling. Mahoraga needs time and repeated exposure. Reinhardt's protections apply immediately and stack in his favor. The fight likely ends with Reinhardt deciding not to drag it out. Reinhardt can release a full mana-infused slash, the same level of attack the one-shot Puck, a great spirit capable of destroying the world. The attack is far beyond anything Mahoraga has adapted to at the start of a fight. Lahiko's ability allows him to ignore all phenomena. If something is treated as a phenomena, it cannot affect him unless he acknowledges it. This includes abilities, attacks, and supernatural effects. Mahoraga's adaptation does not matter here because Mahoraga's attacks are never recognized as valid. Even more importantly, any damage Lahiko inflicts is irreversible. No form of healing, time manipulation, or causality correction can undo it. And Mahoraga is damaged by Lahiko. Adaptation offers zero recovery. Gold Experience Requiem reverse actions and outcomes to zero. Any attempt by Mahoraga to adapt will be undone the moment it occurs. This creates a feedback loop where Mahoraga's adaptation begins but is immediately nullified. Mahoraga can never reach a state of resistance, no matter how many times it attempts to evolve. In the end, Mahoraga's adaptation is one of the strongest defensive abilities in its own series, but is still governed by rules.